This podcast is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
Brothers and sisters in the Dharma, Namo Buddhaya, Jai Bin. Once again, we're in the shrine room at Padmaloka with the entire Padmaloka community. There's 18 of us, 16 plus 2, but the two who are with us, Tarapalita and Pavaka, are old community members. So this is our community for what looks like quite a long time in these very, very strange, very, very weird and very troubling times for many people. And we're on a day retreat. We did a double meditation this morning. We've been in silence, and we're getting into a bit of a routine now at Padmaloka of retreat days, work days, study groups, study sessions. Sunday mornings we do a study session. We have our regular chapter meetings, going for refuge groups, community meetings, of course lots of food, exercise in what we call the house of strength, the zirkhana, to use the Persian term, under the tutelage of a very, very strict surita, who is our yoga master. Every afternoon on our day retreat, Satyaraja's leading the development of the Bodhicitta practice. So we're looking forward to doing that later on in the day. So we're getting into our groove. I should also add that there are cultural events. We're watching the occasional movie in the community lounge. So really, we've got really wonderful conditions at Padmaloka with the beautiful grounds and the countryside all around. And as you can see, we're seated in this magnificent shrine room adorned with these wonderful paintings by Aloka, and in front of the Buddha tiles, which you can be a part of. I said something about that last week. We're very, very fortunate, and we're very aware of the outside world to the extent that we can be. We keep an eye on the news. We have emails from people telling us how they're getting on, telling us what their circumstances are, and even saying how helpful they find the teaching that we're doing from time to time, as well as the teaching being done from other centres, from their local centre and so on. People are saying how helpful the Dharma is at this time. And we're really appreciative of that. We really want to know what is happening to people out in the world, all over the world. People are contacting us from India and South America, as well as from different parts of Britain and Europe. So we want to know these things. We want to feel connected. We want to feel that we are playing our own very small part in what's happening. In what has become, Padmaloka really has become a monastery during this time. We're really away from things. What I want to do in the coming weeks is to explore, to the extent that I'm able, that wonderful, incredible 8th century Buddhist text, the Bodhicarayavatara, the entering into the path of practice or the way of life of a bodhisattva, the guide to the bodhisattva's life as it's variously translated. And as you can see, there's a painting here of Shantideva that Aloka painted many years ago, and which was actually donated to us by an order member who's gone on from beyond the order now. When he was an order member, his name was Padmavajra. He donated this to us, and we're very grateful for this, to remind us of Shantideva. And I think you can probably see Manju Gosha in the film as well, and that's very important to Shantideva. He is very important to Shantideva. I want to offer this series of talks to Urgyen Sangharakshita, to Bhante Urgyen Sangharakshita. This is an offering to him as well as an offering to everybody in the community and everybody in the world, but particularly I want to offer it all up to Bhante Bhante is not just the founder of the order for me. He's my teacher, my preceptor, my Kalyana Mitra. He is the man, I would say, more than anybody, who's introduced me to the Bodhisattva path. Many things are said about Bhante, but from my point of view, I really believe he exemplified a Bodhisattva's practice. You know, he gave himself fully to living the Dharma life for the benefit of all. And I would never be able to understand, or even have a glimmering of understanding, probably better to talk about a glimmering of understanding, of the Bodhisattva path if it wasn't for Bhante. It really is very, very simple. I have enormous gratitude for the riches of the Dharma, and in particular, the riches exemplified in the language of the Bodhicitta, the arising of the Bodhicitta, the Bodhisattva path, and indeed the Bodhicarayavatara. So I offer this to my teacher, this series of talks to Bhante. I really do hope and pray that I will be reborn at a time with him again, as his disciple again, because there's just the untold riches of the Dharma that have opened to me through his blessing and through his teaching. I want to begin this series by talking a little bit about my own journey to the Dharma, which many of you would have heard before. And it's intimately associated with Shantideva and the Bodhisattva path and the Bodhicarayavatara, although at the time I didn't know that. I got into Buddhism, found the Dharma when I was quite young, probably about 16, when I started to read books on Buddhism. And in fact, the books I was reading, Lama Govinda's books, I think he quotes Shantideva in a few places in those books, but that probably wouldn't have registered very powerfully at the time. But my first class was taught by an order member named Buddhadasa in Brighton, before we had a centre in Brighton, when he was staying at a house just outside Brighton under the auspices of the Brighton Buddhist Society, and he was doing classes. And he led a full-length Metabhavana and a sevenfold puja. And by the end of the puja, I knew that I would devote my life to Buddhism. I didn't know how I knew. I didn't know why, but there was this just quiet, kind of ecstatic joy that I'd found what I was looking for. I even knew I'd be an order member, even though I had no idea what that was. And of course, the puja that we recite, and which we continue to recite, the sevenfold puja, is derived from Shantideva's Bodhicarayavatara. So all the time we are, well, not all the time, but every time we do a puja, we're reciting from this great 8th century Buddhist text, or a very small portion of it. So that was an important, obviously an important moment for me, a kind of conversion moment. And then as time went on, and I started to get more involved, very quickly got more involved, I started to listen to Sangharakshita's, to Bhante's lectures. And very early on, I don't quite know when it was, I listened to that lecture, The Awakening of the Bodhi Heart, which is the second lecture in the series on aspects of the Bodhisattva ideal, which is a really wonderful series of lectures, given way back in the 1960s. And it still stands up. No doubt certain teachings Bhante has refined over the years, but the original sort of ideas and the impetus and the inspiration remains unchangeable, I think. And the thing that really struck me, I think, in that lecture, which is a sort of touchstone really for my own Dharma life, is the way in which he started to talk about the Bodhicitta. He took up this idea that an early translation of Bodhicitta, or it's still translated like this, as the thought of enlightenment, because you could translate Bodhicitta as the thought of enlightenment. Bodhi, enlightenment or awakening, citta, thought. And he said that's exactly what it isn't. That's exactly what it isn't. We might be sitting here now thinking about enlightenment, but the bodhicitta has not arisen. It's just a thought. And then he started to talk about a little work of Nagarjuna's, the Bodhicitta Vivarana, the exposition of the bodhicitta, which extracts from which were found in D.T. Suzuki's Outlines of Mahayana Buddhism. And here Nagarjuna says that the bodhicitta is not found in the 5 skandhas. It's not found in any conditioned thing at all. And Bhante says in the lecture, this gives us a tremendous clue as to what the bodhicitta might be, what it is. It's not found in any of the skandhas, it's not anything individual, it's not anything particular. And from that, he started to talk about what the bodhicitta really is an eruption of something transcendental in the mundane, in the individual, a transforming, transfiguring eruption of the transcendental, the eruption of the union of emptiness and compassion, the eruption of wisdom and compassion, becoming a sort of force, an impetus, leading to the liberation of all living beings, leading to the liberation from suffering of all living beings. He went on further saying it's not anybody's personal possession, this bodhicitta. There aren't many bodhicittas. There is, as it were, one bodhicitta, and it manifests and arises in different individuals. And of course, later on, the refinement of that is that the bodhicitta is more likely to arise within a community than within an individual. You could say it's a sort of spirit of enlightenment. He talks like this in the original lecture. The spirit of enlightenment, manifesting, throughout the world, leading to the liberation of all life. In another place, not in that lecture, he talks about the bodhicitta manifesting wherever a kind and intelligent act is performed. Wherever a kind and intelligent act is performed. That's the spirit of enlightenment. That's the bodhicitta. And I think he meant, he didn't mean that that's just going to be the prerogative of Buddhists. It's going to be, the bodhicitta is there wherever there is kindness and intelligence. And he talked about that in another place as being the sort of growing point of human evolution. It's that which is going to lead to transcendence, the transcendence of all beings, the liberation from suffering of all beings. And at a time like this, and again looking at the news and receiving emails and letters, there's lots and lots of evidence of kindness and intelligence, really kind and intelligent acts, being performed in all sorts of ways. Well, that's what we want to unite with. That's what we want to support here at Padmaloka in our own, as it were, contemplative way. That's what we want to really connect with. But this description of the bodhicitta being the arising of something, as it were, not of this world, transcendental, not indefinable, sublime, profound, beyond any kind of conceptualization, that arises and animates and transforming individuals together, as it were, really made complete sense to me. I don't know why it made complete sense, but the idea that really the bodhicitta is coming from another dimension, that Buddhist life is about purifying yourself to open up to that other dimension which is not just to do with your own transformation, but that must embrace increasingly more and more people. That made complete sense intuitively early on. I don't know why it made sense, but it defines my Buddhist life. I don't mean that makes me incredibly successful in my Buddhist life, not at all. But this idea that there are those, if you like, different elements to a Buddhist life, that you're opening to something greater than you, that transcends self and other, and it transforms you and purifies you, and you actively cooperate with that, and you're thinking not just in terms of your own development of welfare, but to include more and more people, in principle, all of life, that made complete sense to me. And it still makes complete sense to me. And I acknowledge that I'm not, I meet people who tell me about their life, and it's clear that very early on they have a very, very deep feeling for life, for human beings, and it's expressed, and for all living beings, and it's expressed in the vocation that they take up, the work that they do, maybe in health work or social work or activism or even politics and so on, or community service of one kind. I've met people in the police force with that attitude. I'm not like that. I'm not somebody who has that kind of calling. I'm not somebody in a sense sort of, from an early age kind of concerned with the welfare of the world or anything like that. But it makes complete sense to me that a Buddhist life must be about that. It cannot just be about making oneself comfortable with a few Buddhist techniques or Buddhist-derived techniques and some nice ideas. And basically you make yourself more and more cozy, in the world, just for you and yours. It must be expansive. It must be reaching out to include others. Otherwise it couldn't be the ultimate truth. It couldn't be the way things really are. That made complete sense to me. So it wasn't surprising then that, around that time in the early days of the movement, there was this translation of the Bodhicarayavatara entering the path of enlightenment, as it was translated by Marian Matic. And I loved that book. Bhante did a seminar on that book, which became the Endlessly Fascinating Cry. It was his first seminar, the first study seminar that he did in the order in Norfolk, not here, in another place in North Norfolk. And I got hold of that book. I even managed to get hold of an early version of the unedited seminar transcript. And because I had a lot of time on my hands in those days, because we didn't have much in the way of livelihood and things like that, my morning practice would include reading from Marian Matic's Bodhicarayavatara. So there are many verses in that have become sort of part of me, part of my heart, and have had a very strong influence upon me. Apparently, Matic's translation has been superseded now, particularly by the one by Kate Crosby and Andrew Skilton. That's in the Oxford series. That's a really wonderful translation of the Bodhicarayavatara. But even so, that early translation made a great impression upon me. So it's been an inspirational text, the Bodhicarayavatara, for me. A great inspirational text, and it's something that I continually reflect upon. It's very interesting. I'm reading a book of readings by different academics, some of them Buddhists, in the Bodhicarayavatara. And one writer was saying that, a text like this, traditional text, as it would be in many traditional societies, certainly Buddhist texts, they're not meant to be read as we read now. Texts like this, like the Bodhicarayavatara, are supposed to be enacted, lived out. They have a kind of power, as it were, in themselves. So you read them to act, to live. That's the whole point of them. And indeed, there are certain sections of the Bodhicarayavatara that are ritually enacted, particularly the puja verses and the dedication verses. So it's very important, I think, that we make the text live as much as possible, and I hope my talks will do something like that. I want to say a little bit about Shantideva before we get into the first chapter of the text. So there's very little known about Shantideva. Shantideva means the god of peace, the deity of peace. Very little known about him. Most of the material we have is probably legendary, although that has a particular kind of meaning to it. He seems to have come from Western India, in what is now the state of Gujarat, and he was from a kshatriya, a warrior family. He went forth and he became a monk at the great monastic university of Nalanda. So 8th century Nalanda is really at its peak. It's the sort of high noon of Indian Buddhism, really, this tremendous centre of learning and spiritual practice. He got not a very good reputation, though, because he seemed to spend his time eating, sleeping, and going to the toilet. So his nickname was Bu-Su-Ku. These syllables are Sanskrit, are related to the Sanskrit words for eating, sleeping, and shitting. I'm just quoting the text when I use that language. So he was known as eat, sleep, shit, because that's all he seemed to do. That's all he seemed to do. And of course, it's such a prestigious monastery as Nalanda, this was, they just got sort of fed up with him, really. And at Nalanda, one of the things that needed to happen every so often was for there to be a big feast offering to the monks given by the local kings and princes and donors to the monastery. And in response to that, there would be a discourse. There would be a Dharma discourse. So the monks decided that it was time to humiliate Busuku and have him give the discourse, and then he would be humiliated and rusticated, sent out of the monastery. So they built an especially big throne for him. This is the sort of thing that goes on in these places. They're not necessarily all lovely people just because they're Buddhist monks. They're really quite cruel. So they set up this big seat so that it was hard for him to get up onto it. And Shantideva said, what would you like? Would you like a sort of traditional discourse, or would you like something new? Would you like something a bit fresh and different? They thought this was hilarious. So, do something new. So he started to recite the Bodhicarayavatara, these beautiful verses, all about the Bodhisattva's path, on and on. Of course, they're becoming more and more they're becoming speechless as he teaches. And as it goes on, and as he gets to the Prajnaparamita, the wisdom section, he starts to lift off. See it in this painting. He lifts off into space. And when he gets to verse 34, they say, of the Prajnaparamita, the perfection of wisdom section, which is a particularly difficult section. I'm not going to try and tackle it when we get to that. I might make a few points. But he says in verse 34, when neither being nor non-being remain before the mind, then with no further activity one finds peace. At that point he disappeared into space. And I think that the rest of the Bodhicarayavatara was recited from space. And they're all completely stunned. And the next place Shantideva turns up, or Busuku turns up, is in the Mahasiddha literature. He's listed as one of the 84 tantric siddhas, living in a mountainous region with tribal people, bringing the Dharma to a very different kind of community. So I like to think that he's putting his bodhisattva ideal into practice. And what the monks hadn't realised was that Shantideva's practice was happening at night. It wasn't happening in the day. In the day he might have been eating, sleeping and going to the toilet. But at night he was in touch with Manjushri, Manjughosha, who initiated him into the Arapajana mantra and was teaching him the Dharma. So the Bodhicarayavatara comes from the Bodhicitta itself in the form of Manjushri, a direct transmission to Shantideva. So there's a wonderful story of Shantideva, and you can see sort of hints of it perhaps, and why this story would develop in the Bodhicarayavatara itself, because you have the sense at times, there are different almost voices in the Bodhicarayavatara, or different ways in which Shantideva is speaking. Sometimes he's directing the teaching to everybody. Sometimes he seems to be, a lot of the time, he's talking to himself. And you get the sense of something extraordinarily sublime has happened to this man. Something has arisen, something has descended, but the material that he's in relationship with in himself is very challenging. I'll have something more to say about that in a moment. So what I want to do now is start going through the Bodhicarayavatara. It won't be a verse by verse commentary. That would take far too long. And some people have said that these talks are a bit too long. Although somebody did also write saying that they're not long enough. But anyway, eventually the community I'm sure will start leaving the room if I go on too long. So I'll get a sign when it's too much. But let's hear Shantideva's words. Alas, not in Sanskrit, the original language they're given, in English translation. So chapter 1 is called Praising the Bodhicitta. Bodhicitta Anushanksa. Bodhicitta Anushanksa, which means praising. A really strong praise of the qualities of the Bodhicitta. Marian Matic makes the point that what Shantideva does, he doesn't get metaphysical about the Bodhicitta, he doesn't deify it, although perhaps in a sense he does, he praises. That's his first response, is to praise, this wonderful thing, non-thing, this extraordinary thing, the bodhicitta, and its arising. I think this is a real sign of some sort of spiritual progress, spiritual development, when you praise, when you give praise to what you've found, when you give praise to the qualities that you're trying to develop, or the ideal that you're trying to live out. So praising the bodhicitta. Om Namo Buddhaya. I bow down in adoration to the Sugatas and their sons, and to their bodies of the perfect Dharma, and to all those who are praiseworthy. I shall describe briefly, according to the scriptures, the undertaking of the vow and observance of the sons of the Sugata. There is nothing really original here, and I have no skill in literary composition. I do not imagine that I can benefit others. I have done this to perfume my mind. While doing this, the surge of my inspiration to cultivate the good increases. If later on this work is seen by another person, someone like me, then they too might benefit. This favourable moment, extremely hard to meet, has arrived. Once met, it yields the welfare of mankind. If the advantage is not taken now, when will this meeting come again? At night, in darkness thick with clouds, a flash of lightning gives a moment's bright vision. So sometimes, by the power of the Buddha, the mind of the world might for a moment turn to acts of good. The brightness is hard to obtain constantly, while the forces of evil are vast and terrible. What other good could conquer those forces if there were not the perfect bodhicitta? So I just want to make a very few comments on some of these verses. He starts off, of course, as a traditional Buddhist would, by bowing down to the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha, particularly to the Bodhisattvas and to all those who are praiseworthy. So that's the first thing, a bowing down and opening up. You notice this phrase, the sons of the Sugata. The Sugata Putra. Sons is the literal translation of Sugata, or and so on. But of course, these days in translations, it's often translated as the offspring of the Buddhas or the child of the Buddhas. But personally, I don't find those translations entirely satisfactory. Sons of the Buddha, but if you're obviously a woman, daughters of the Buddha. There are daughters of the Buddha. There are female bodhisattvas. So this is really important. So if I say sons and so on, do add in daughters. That's quite important. Shantideva's not concerned to be original. He says it's a sort of new work, but he's not concerned to be original just for its own sake. He's not concerned with novelty or anything like that. What his work represents is someone who's completely soaked themselves in the teachings of the Buddha. He's really soaked himself in the different Buddhist sutras and agamas, as they're called. They're the equivalent in Sanskrit of the Nikayas. And there are many, many verses in the Bodhicarayavatara which you can trace to other texts. What makes the work, as it were, original is the whole way in which he's done that. It's coming out of an intensive engagement with Buddhist practice, with Buddhist living, with Buddhist study. But it's coming out of his soaking himself in the tradition. And I love this phrase, I've done this to perfume my mind. So he wants to, the motive for teaching is to perfume his own mind, is to get to know this material much more deeply, for that to pervade his consciousness. I must admit, I don't know if it's something to do with it being an extroverted character, but I find that I learn more through communicating the Dharma. I know that's not true of everybody with different temperaments, but I find that if I really want to know something about the Dharma, if I imagine myself communicating it to another, I have a much better way of understanding of it. It does perfume my mind. It's something to do with, I think, objectifying what I'm learning, what I'm taking in. Sometimes people ask me, well, how do you reflect on the Dharma? And one of the ways I explain, I said, well, imagine you're explaining what you've studied to someone else. Just create that sort of drama in your own mind. Imagine you're doing it and see what that feels like. You might find that you're getting a much better understanding of what you've studied in thinking about explaining it to others. So he wants to benefit himself, but of course, if others find it helpful, if they find it useful, well, he's very, very glad of that. And he wants it, he's doing this to, this lovely phrase, while doing this, the surge of my inspiration to cultivate the good increases. That in communicating the Dharma, in teaching the Dharma, to use that expression, it's so that the surge of your inspiration to do good, the word is kushala, to be skillful, increases. That's why we communicate the Dharma. That's why we communicate together the Dharma, so that we're more inspired to behave skillfully, to go in the direction of enlightenment. And then we have this very, very wonderful phrase. This favourable moment, extremely hard to meet, has arrived. Once met, it yields the welfare of mankind. If the advantage is not taken now, when will this meeting come again? So the favourable moment, the kshana sampad. Moment is kshana in Sanskrit. The favourable is sampad. The kshana sampad, the favourable moment. It's really, really important. Sometimes the word kshana is identified with human life itself. So human life is a moment. In the traditional Buddhist conception that is of endless time, the endless caravan of rebirths going on and on. So this human existence is just a moment. It's just a flash. And of course, a human life, the moment of human life, the duration of human life, is made up of tiny moments. So Shantideva is saying this is the favourable moment. Right now is the favourable moment. As a human being, we have everything we need. We have this, I've mentioned this in other talks already, this precious human existence, this precious human moment, this very, very special life form, not said with any kind of arrogance or conceit or any kind of biblical resonance or anything like that the world is created for us. It's just a fact. Human life is very, very precious. We have incredible freedoms, we have incredible leisure, actually. We have this remarkable consciousness. We're not just locked into sense consciousness, we have this reflective consciousness. We can reflect upon our experience. Because we can reflect upon our experience, we can practice ethics. We don't have to act out our desires or our aversions. We can put a pause in between instinct and action, and we can behave ethically. We can treat people as they ought to be treated. We can even have a vision, because of this consciousness, of enlightenment itself, indeed of the Bodhicitta itself. We have this remarkable consciousness, and it's an extraordinary moment in our continuum of lives. So he's asking the question, because we have this precious human moment, this precious human opportunity, if we don't take advantage now, when will the opportunity come again? We sort of assume that things are going to go on in the same way forever. Well, how rudely have we been awakened in these last months? Things are not going to be the same. Things aren't the same. Our lives, everybody's lives, are profoundly changed. And all the dependencies that we had on, and all the securities that we had, have gone. Well, not all of them, but a lot of them have. So we've been thrust into this, very extraordinary situation. And it's time to ponder. The moment has come to really ponder our lives. The preciousness of human existence itself, stripped of all the usual things that we do. What is this life for? What are we supposed to be doing with this life? What can we do with this life? What do we really value? So it's very important to wake up to the moment of human life and the moments that make up a human life. Not with incredible anxiety or tension, but especially coming into a sense of deep appreciation for our human existence. Starting with that, deep appreciation for our human existence. And then very feelingfully, he has this wonderful phrase, at night, in darkness thick with clouds, a flash of lightning gives a moment's bright vision. So sometimes by the power of the Buddha, the mind of the world might for a moment turn to acts of good. This is quite a phrase. It's quite a phrase to ponder, and I've noticed, looking at different commentaries and interpretations, people seem to have different kind of takes on it. But let's just take this phrase. So sometimes by the power of the Buddha, the Buddhanubhava, the majestic power of the Buddha. So something has opened up for us. A lightning flash has rent the clouds asunder. We can see clearly what we need to do through our encounter with the Buddha's teaching and with the teachings that have come down to us. Something has opened up for us so that we can live a serious Buddhist life, a meaningful life. There can be an assumption, and I've noticed it amongst Buddhists, that everything good in us we've generated, and that it stands, as it were, independently of everything around us. But so much of our virtue, so much of our goodness is dependent so many other factors. As Buddhists, we're in receipt of teachings that have come down to us, teachings and practices that have come down to us from the Buddha through the lineage of teachers, from our own teacher, from our spiritual friends. We haven't made them up. We haven't invented them. We've found them, as it were. They've come to us through the power of the blessings of the Buddhas. But it is more than that. So much of our virtue, so much of our goodness is also dependent on living in a stable society and a well-organized society. And we noticed when that changes sometimes how different people can be. I've noticed again sometimes a kind of complacency that can come in where we assume that our virtue is independent of everything else. Well, I know for myself, I'm really confident that my own virtue is not independent of really good conditions. The really good Buddhist conditions that I'm in and the friendships I have with other Buddhists, but also the country I live in, the world I live in, the society that I live in, the organised society that I live in. It's very easy to complain and criticise and say what's wrong and how bad everything is. But I'm very, very glad that we have people running our country who are advising us very strongly on how we should be living at the moment. I'm very, very glad that there are people, deeply grateful that there are people working in the health service and so on, and the police force and other institutions like that there is good governance, because my virtue is dependent on that. I lived in India for many years and I saw when things would break down, when society would break down and you had more or less the sort of tribal attitude, between different groupings and what could be unleashed at that time with people reduced to the status of wild animals in relation to one another, sort of pack animals. I saw that happening. Well, at the moment, we and I hope and pray it will continue, we're not in that position. So my virtue is very, very dependent on good conditions. Yes, it comes from the majestic power and blessing, the Buddhanubhava. It comes from the Buddha and the tradition that's come down to us. But it comes from all sorts of other forces as well. So this is why we've got to, again, not be complacent. Really work on ourselves and develop a greater and greater independence of our virtue, genuinely independent, something unconditioned. So this is why Shantideva says this: the brightness is hard to obtain constantly, while the forces of evil are vast and terrible. What other good could conquer those forces if they were not the perfect Bodhicitta? This is a really key verse when we start to talk about the Bodhicitta. Our Buddhist practice is conditioned. We're developing skillfulness, we're developing our Buddhist ethics, we're even becoming more loving, more generous, more kindly, more insightful, more wise, hopefully. But it's conditioned. And that's very important. We need that. We need to practice in that way. But it can be knocked over. It can be taken away. In fact, all of our, all of our structures, both within ourselves and all around us, can and indeed will be taken away. I'm sitting in this amazing shrine room. I'm sitting in this amazing place called Padmaloka, which has had so much love and attention gone into it over decades, and it's sort of grown and developed, in that time with all the different contributions from so many, individuals, so many different communities over the years, and we're really reaping the fruits of that. But we're very aware, particularly at this time, with no. With our livelihood, which is running retreats, not that we think of it as a livelihood, but it is a livelihood, being very, very severely threatened. Well, Padmaloka is threatened. You know, it can be taken away. It could be removed from things, as people, you know, find in their own centres, you know, all over the world, and not just their centres, but you know, everybody's their homes, their family situation. There is so much that is under threat. That is actually the nature of conditioned existence. And Buddhists are not exempt from that. Buddhist, as it were, institutions are not exempt from that. It's well worth contemplating the incredible Buddhism that would have existed in Central Asia. Well, the rivers changed course. There were droughts. So these wonderful Buddhist cities, thriving Buddhist civilizations that existed in Central Asia, all we have are stones and a few texts which get revealed from time to time. You know, it's all profoundly impermanent. All that goodness, you know, is seen for a while. It has an effect, but it arises and passes. This is what happens. The forces of evil are vast and terrible. When Shantideva says the word evil, the word in Sanskrit is papa. It doesn't necessarily mean really malevolent action. You know, where people are acting out of violence and hatred and destroying others. It does include that. But the word papa, which is very hard to translate satisfactorily into English, evil is probably the best, but it's not meant in any kind of theistic sense. It's more like bad. The bad things that happen in life. That's what he's getting at. Maybe done by others through their very unskillful action, but just the bad. Illness, aging, painfully aging, death, the arising and passing of things. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the ravages of impermanence. We exist in a world like that. That's where we are. Yes, we can do a lot of good. We can make a difference, actually, to the world around us. I really believe that our community, our order, our Triratna community does make a tremendous difference. I know that from what people have told me, that they, on a recent retreat, people were telling me they would have been dead if they hadn't found the Dharma. Just their life was so many difficulties in their life, so many forces that they were having to deal with. They became very self-destructive. And the Dharma saved them, you know, from that. So I really believe that, you know, the Dharma can do that. But it arises and passes unless we give rise, that we bring into this world this Bodhicitta, which is, if you like, a love, a compassion, a wisdom, an understanding, and intelligence that's emanating from something which is not conditioned. It's lokutara, to use the technical Buddhist language, that which is beyond the lokas, beyond the kama loka, rupa loka, the arupa loka, not existing in some sort of heaven. That's not what lokutara means. It means you can't say where it comes from. It doesn't have a place or a space or a ground. It's neither existent nor non-existent. It transcends all those extremes. But it will not break. It will never give up. It will always recur. No matter what is taken away, all your good deeds disappointed, all the efforts that you've made disappointed. But if there is bodhicitta, no, it will not turn back. It will never give up. A bit later on, Shantideva says, all ordinary goodness, having lost its fruit, like the banana tree begins to decay, but the tree of the bodhicitta constantly bears fruit and does not decay. It bears fruit perpetually. So, you know, our goodness very often it swings back and forth. We make a bit of progress, we get knocked back. We do something good, then there's maybe a reaction. It arises and then it's disappointed, it's frustrated by the circumstances of life. The bodhicitta isn't like that. It begets and it does not decay. It bears fruit perpetually. So the bodhicitta is the endlessly creative mind, the endlessly creative consciousness that will keep coming back, that will keep responding to the world. So that's what we're concerned with getting in touch with. It's what Shantideva wants to develop in the stream of his being, as it were, what he wants to be transformed by. As the text goes on, well, he tries to explain what this is like. This is the benefit, the bodhicitta, discovered by the lords of the sages, the Buddhas, after meditating for many eons, whereby deep welling happiness easily elates immeasurable masses of beings. That's what the bodhicitta does. Those who long to transcend the hundreds of miseries of existence, who long to relieve creatures of their sorrows, who long to enjoy many hundreds of joys, must never abandon the bodhicitta. There you have it. This is what the bodhicitta is concerned with. It's concerned to bring about the ending, the transcendence of all suffering, of all life. It's concerned with that, with you and with others, and it's concerned to bring happiness, to bring bliss, endless bliss. It's quite startling when you read Shantideva's words, his vision of the bodhicitta. He's really trying to evoke something for us that we can somehow picture and visualize, within our minds, within our consciousness, that we're orientated to now. So all of our goodness, all of our efforts for goodness are to open up, in the end, to this bodhicitta, which brings about the transcendence of the hundreds of myriads of existence, that relieves creatures of their sorrows and brings about the joys of life, the greatest possible joys. Then a couple of other verses and I'll close. When the bodhicitta has arisen in him, a captive in the prison of existence, he is straightway hailed a son of the Buddhas or a daughter of the Buddhas, to be revered in the world of gods and men. Taking this impure image of the human form, the bodhicitta transmutes it into the priceless image of the jewel of the conqueror. Grasp tightly this highly potent quicksilver elixir known as the bodhicitta, which must be thoroughly worked. These very, very key phrases in this first chapter. So when the bodhicitta has arisen in him or her, a captive in the prison of existence. In Crosby and Skilton's translation, they translate a captive in the prison of existence more literally as a wretch. They use that word wretch, very, very strong language. Old Buddhists don't mind strong language. I mean, we probably don't like the idea of thinking of ourselves as a wretch. That means somebody wretched. Now, it's very interesting that Shantideva should use this language. Very often people can feel that they're not good enough, that they're not good enough to lead a Buddhist life, that they're not good enough to give rise to the bodhicitta. Sometimes we can wring our hands. I certainly wring my hands when I sort of realise I've been practicing the Dharma for 4 decades and progress seems to be, well, not just negligible, non-existent. I can feel a wretch on that occasion. And I'm not alone. I know I'm not alone because people tell me these things. It's very, very interesting. There's a whole discussion in Shantideva's other work, the Shiksha Samuchaya, the compendium of training, the compendium of discipline, which is a wonderful work. It was found, according to the legend, in his cell after he'd vanished. This other great work that he was working on, some core verses illustrated with the most choice and amazing quotations from different sutras. And in fact, we have knowledge of certain Mahayana sutras that have been lost in Sanskrit because of Shantideva's compendium. But there's a whole discussion he has whether or not an ordinary person can give rise to the bodhicitta. And by an ordinary person is meant somebody who's a wretch. There's obviously some sort of concern that is the bodhicitta just for the exalted, the highly developed. And of course, as you go on in your bodhisattva training, you will. You pass through what are known as the bhumis, the stages and so on. And yes, we think of a bodhisattva as a highly developed being. But it's very, very clear in the tradition that it's not actually like that. So let's listen to Shantideva from the Shiksha Samuchaya. When an ordinary person arouses the bodhicitta, how do we know that this intention is not mere words? Because many scriptures teach us that it's not. So for Shantideva, if the scriptures say it is, it must be so. For example, we are taught in the Vimalakirti Nidesha, when someone has a false view of real selfhood, the size of Mount Meru, so in other words, a complete egomaniac, when somebody like that arouses the bodhicitta, because of that, the qualities of a Buddha grow in that person. And another sutra, the Ratnakaranda Sutra, the Casket of Jewels Sutra, declares, an ordinary person can be a bodhisattva. Well, I looked up the whole of the passage from the Vimalakirti Nidesha. He goes even further. Noble sir, this is Manjushri actually talking, noble sir, one who stays in the fixed determination of the vision of the uncreated, in other words, someone who's got a vision of emptiness just for themselves, as it were, is not capable of arousing the bodhicitta. However, one who lives among created things, in the minds of passions, without seeing any truth, is indeed capable of arousing the bodhicitta. Noble sir, flowers like the blue lotus, the red lotus, the white lotus, the water lily, and the moon lily do not grow on the dry ground in the wilderness, but do grow in the swamps and mud banks. Just so, the Buddha qualities do not grow in living beings certainly destined for the uncreated, but do grow in those living beings who are like swamps and mud banks of passion. Phew. Likewise, the seeds do not grow in the sky, but do grow in the earth. So the Buddha qualities do not grow in those determined for the absolute, but do grow in those who arouse the bodhicitta after having produced a Sumeru-like mountain of egotistic views. So it's a great relief, isn't it? That what a wonderful relief. You know, us in the mud banks of passion, the swamps of passion, full of egotism and self-centeredness, we can develop the bodhicitta. We can develop the bodhicitta. Don't be downhearted. We can develop the bodhicitta. And then there's something really feelingful. This is from another sutra. Manjushri, it is like this, for example, a baby sparrow. This is springtime, after all. A baby sparrow that is still inside the enclosed space of the egg, has not broken through the egg, and has not come out from within, but still produces the call of the sparrow. Manjushri, the same way, a bodhisattva who is still inside the enclosed space of the egg of ignorance, who has not broken through the view of self, and who has not come out of the threefold world, lets loose the call of the Buddhas, the cry of emptiness, unconditioned and untrammeled. It's wonderful, isn't it? And it can feel like that our aspiration is like that little cheep of a baby sparrow trying to get out of that egg. And of course we're being called as well from outside by mum sparrow trying to break in. And sometimes it can really feel like that. Our effort seems so small, so feeble. And yet think of that sparrow, that little sparrow, that life breaking out of the shell of ignorance. This is what the bodhicitta is like. Our material might be very unpromising. I think you quoted Satyaraja Bhante the other day that the bodhicitta can arise in even the most unpromising of material, something like that. Well, yes, we're all, speaking for myself, but I think I can speak for my friends here. Lots of unpromising material indeed. But doesn't matter how unpromising. The mud banks of passion, the swamps of passion. We live near swamps, we can know what they're like. The bodhicitta can arise and it can be worked. So I want to just talk about this verse. Taking this impure image, the ashuchi pratima, the impure image of the human form, the impure image of the human form, very interesting expression. This is, as it were, not the real human form. It's the impure form of the human being. Perhaps that's what it means. The bodhicitta transmutes it into the priceless image of the jewel of the conqueror, the Jinaratna. Grasp tightly this highly potent quicksilver elixir, the rasa of Indian alchemy, known as the bodhicitta, which must be thoroughly worked or struck, vedanya, must be worked into us. I love this phrase. I think it's so, I suppose, mythic, symbolic, that bringing the bodhicitta into us, working it into us, works alchemy. Yes, we're full of passions, full of egotistic views, full of reactivity, full of low things, bad things, very often in bad situations, as we are now. The bodhicitta transmutes it all. It really is like the rasa of the alchemist. It's very interesting. You get this, by the way, a lot in Shantideva. The bodhicitta is like the quicksilver elixir. Well, you can't get hold of quicksilver, but he's saying you've got to grasp it tightly. You get this a lot in Shantideva. He talks about grasping, embracing the bodhicitta, and yet, of course, it's so subtle, the bodhicitta, so easy to misunderstand, so easy to get the wrong end of the stick about. But he's saying you have to get hold of it, and you have to work it into your life, work it into your consciousness to transmute what is there. And it's a big feature of Shantideva's text. He talks about having hatred of hatred. He talks about being passionate about removing the passions. We'll come to these in the later chapters. He talks about making your friend, making your enemy your greatest friend, because he teaches you patience, or your greatest teacher, your greatest guru, because he teaches you, or she teaches you patience and forbearance. So everything starts to get reversed in the Bodhicarayavatara. The bad situation is actually the most favourable situation. These circumstances that we have at the moment, yes, well, we know how terrible they are for so many people, and we don't make light of that in any way. But for us, living here, we are in enforced retreat. We are practicing viveka, we are practicing isolation, as it's called. The removal from engagement in many distractions. So we are, as it were, in the alembic, the cauldron of the alchemist. We can turn these circumstances into something different. And you also have, of course, this famous meditation called Tonglen, the sending and receiving meditation. This is very, very popular in Tibetan Buddhism, very, very profound practice. It depends, I think, this practice, on you being tremendously inspired by the vision of the bodhicitta. Tremendously inspired by that. Not just inspired by that, but somehow imagining it, visualizing it. There's different ways in which you can do that. Different procedures for getting in touch with that. You can imagine the bodhicitta as a great bodhisattva, that you unite with, that you connect with. In some texts they talk about literally that you see the bodhicitta as the wish-fulfilling jewel, as a wonderful, multifaceted jewel that can change and transform anything into its opposite, into the positive. Somehow or other you connect with the bodhicitta, you visualize it in your heart, or you visualize yourself as a part of it. You really intensify your vision of the beauty of the bodhicitta, and then you contemplate the people around you. You bring to mind people who are suffering, people who you know, people who you don't know. And it's not just physical suffering, it's not just psychological suffering. There's another kind of suffering, a very deep suffering, which Shantideva and the tradition are concerned to remove. It's called the suffering of conditioned existence itself, the suffering of unenlightenment, the suffering of ignorance. There's this sort of vision, if you like, that Buddhist tradition has, that really and truly the reason why things go so badly is because we are ignorant, because we don't know, because we feel so restricted, because we're not actually living out from our deepest possible potential, which is for bodhicitta, which, in one place Shantideva in this chapter calls the seed of all good in the world. There is that suffering as well, the suffering of lack of fulfillment. So what we do in this Tonglen meditation, having connected with this vision of the bodhicitta, really visualizing it, really feeling it, if you like, this vast consciousness, radiant consciousness filled with unconditional love and compassion, which is bigger than us, bigger than all of us put together. We then imagine that suffering coming from others, coming from particular people who are suffering, coming from the world and its suffering, and we breathe it in on the in-breath, that big black cloud of suffering. You just take it in fearlessly. You're not daunted, because in a way you're not doing it. You're in touch with that great bodhicitta, and you take it into that radiance, and it just dissolves away in that radiance. It just dissolves. It becomes bliss itself. And on the out-breath, you breathe out the great bliss. You breathe out from the bodhicitta. So that there is this moonlight of bliss, or this nectar of bliss. There's different descriptions of what you can do. Pouring down on others, pouring down on particular people, your loved ones, your enemies even, all of life itself, relieving their suffering. You do this over and over. It's said, if you really get into it, as you do this, that feeling for the bodhicitta gets stronger and stronger and stronger, becomes more and more effective. And this is the way of alchemy with the bodhicitta. This is the way you turn suffering into bliss. And of course, it's not just a meditation practice. You need to take that into all the affairs of your life, all of your different relationships, all of the things that you do, engaging with the sufferings of others and responding with unconditional and unconditioned kindness and generosity. This is the way we transform even the negative into the bodhicitta. Of course, this is a very, very demanding practice, and we need very, very good conditions to do it. But this is the way of the alchemy of the bodhicitta, and we'll be seeing more about this as we go along. So I think that's really all I want to say for today, to do with the first chapter. There's many other verses that I haven't covered in this first chapter, but I think it's probably better that we stop at this point, talking about that kind of meditation practice. We'll be doing it this afternoon with Satyaraja. But think, as your practice over the coming week, of whatever arises that's difficult, that's painful, connect it with the bodhicitta. One of the ways they teach of this in the mind training, the Lojong tradition that is so popular in Tibetan Buddhism. Whatever happens to you, use it to connect with everybody else. That's what the Bodhicitta is. Bodhicitta is a way of connecting with all life. So you're feeling a bit low, a bit flat. I've been feeling at times in this period sort of really flat. I don't think the flatness is just personal. I get the feeling there's a lot of flatness in the land, as it were. And it's easy to think, oh, I feel a bit flat, I don't feel too good, a bit miserable, and so on. Well, don't fixate on that. And don't then go and, waste your time on something that distracts you from that. Oh, having another bit of toast, or, I don't know, looking at Netflix or whatever you do. I mean, do that sometimes. But the real practice of alchemy here is to think, may all the feelings of flatness in all living beings come into me. And may they feel buoyant. May they feel joyful. May all the feelings of depression all around me, come into the Bodhicitta. And may people feel elated. May they feel pleased. May they feel satisfied. Feeling a bit grumpy, a bit resentful, may all those suffering from grumpiness and resentment, may I take all that in. I'll have that. I can have that because I'm in touch with the Bodhicitta. May everybody be filled with happiness and well-being and love for one another. They do this religiously in the Lojong training, any time of the day. Feeling bored, may the boredom of all living beings come into me, pour into me. May everybody be interested. May everybody be interesting. So it's this wonderfully generous, expansive response to what's happening. You use whatever's happening to connect with all life around you and to connect with Bodhicitta. You don't shrink back. When things are difficult, we shrink. We become so tight. The Bodhicitta is the exact opposite. It's this softening, it's this expanding, it's this opening, and it's this intention to feel this sense of what Bhante and what Subhuti have called the solidarity with all of life, so that we connect with all beings, and in the end, we connect with all beings, so that all, in the end, at some unimaginable point in the future, will be liberated, will be Buddhas. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. And thank you.